Let's see if this works. There we go. Finally. Alrighty. So, I am doing a run through for my presentation. Let me look at the time here. It's about 3:56. I wanted to test out the run time and see how fast I can present this content to you guys, because I haven't really done a full run through. And basically, this presentation is for my 582 Black Feminist Theory class. And I have only an allotted amount of time, basically only an hour, to explain what I want to talk about. If that, it really is dependent on other people who happen to speak before me. If I get the chance to speak first, that'd be really great, but also that may not be the case. So, this is a specialized recording, not only just for myself to see, like, to test things out, but also I really just wanted to have this recorded and as a reference for any other material that connects to this topic of bodies and how we go on to conceptualize them through the patriarchy. So, this presentation, as I just mentioned, is on bodies, and more specifically on how to love ourselves into existence. So, the first thing of note is that I will go into depth on socialized and gendered bodies and how we go on to experience those bodies throughout our time existing, either as a feminine existence or a masculine existence. And of course, there are other existences beyond just those two, but those are going to be my main focus in this presentation, because to go into further depth would take way, way longer than just an hour. And though I am very much interested in those other existences, and I know that they have significant implications as well, it's not something I can explore given the time. Okay, so after, discussing gender norms as a totality, I would like to visit how those gender norms can become internalized and violent in the way that they manifest through body dysmorphia. And body dysmorphia is something that I believe, as a result of the patriarchy, it is manifest through increments, and it is not entirely unavoidable. It is something that wedges itself into the way we conceive and construct our bodies. And I allude to this in the paradoxical control of the goblin that is inside all of us, which is an allusion to the short story Goblin from Bad Dolls, Rachel Harrison's Bad Dolls, and we'll discuss some imagery and definitions associated with goblins and how I connect it to body dysmorphia. Next, we will be going and discussing the implications of what happens as a result of this white male hegemony on the body. What is it doing to us, right? It's not simply a mental problem. It is something, the locus of it is, in my opinion, very, very violent, and very intentionally minimizing, controlling, and rigid. It's very rigid, and it has very death-provoking qualities rather than life-giving. And so this death-provoking quality I kind of equate in the next part of this presentation as the Medusa complex, which is something, if anybody knows myth and Medusa, of course, turns onlookers into stone, which of course I will deconstruct as a mirroring of what happens to the feminine body and any other body that really doesn't fit into the white male hegemony, this freezing, this feeling of idolatry, of fetishization. A lot of the time, this can happen to specific bodies. This fetishization, this voyeurism of being turned into quite literally stone, by means of the male gaze. So then, how do we navigate this male gaze, right? How do we avoid uh, this temporal pause, which I will get into? Well, I believe it is by rewriting your worth. And a prime example of this is demonstrated in Sandra Cisneros' poem Loose Woman, in her poetry book Loose Woman, also titled Loose Woman. And it really explores what it means to break away from this idea of being constrained in our bodies, but within social norms. How do we disrupt that, right? And also, in the same way, how do we use this violence, our own feminine violence in the case of feminine bodies, right? And maybe as a feminine woman of color, because Sandra Cisneros is a Latina woman discussing her experience as a Latina woman. Okay, she's not simply a white woman. She is breaking away from multiple existences at the same time. And she uses this violent imagery, but at the same time, it feels like a creative breaking away. Violence against the mold that has been violently put on us. Not towards men, not toward other bodies, but towards the antibody, right? The antibody that we have been constrained and put into. And so, lastly, I will just discuss what it means to be heavy enough, right? Okay? We have been told throughout our entire lifetimes, men, women, non binary peoples, everyone, dependent on what sort of status they take on in life, that they are not good enough. That they're either too heavy, too skinny, too black, too diverse, too, let's say, they can't too wild, right? Their speech is too wild, too pervasive. And it is when we take that space that we are deemed too heavy. And what I would like to promote here is this idea that we are just heavy enough, that our bodies are something that we should explore more of, and that we should not be minimizing them by these patriarchal, male, hegemonic standards that have been socialized and put onto us. So, without further ado, let's dive right into it. Okay, so first here, I just want to give credit where credit is due. I reached out to one of my closest friends, best friend actually, to share some of her art. And of course, there's other art in here that isn't hers, but I just wanted to give a quick nod and credit to her artwork, because I believe that as a woman of color, her artwork is so important and so inspirational, and has direct correlation to what I'm discussing here, and we'll get into that on what it means to be just heavy enough. But her art captures this essence, and I hope that when you look at it, you feel the same sort of empowerment that I get from the way the female form and the black, the woman of color. I mean, even if you're Latina, if you're Asian, if you were outside of the mold, you will feel this empowerment come through her art. It's beautiful. Anyway, so let's get into it. What does it mean to exist through a socialized and gendered body? Okay? What are they? What sort of constructs are being put onto us? Well, first things first, according to Megan Burke, these norms of gender are not merely constructed, but are first and foremost lived, and indeed undertaken as bodily projects. This is not something that is thrown at us and then we just kind of agree based off of the fact that they've been thrown at us. These are internalized, okay? These are structures that eventually, over time, get deeply embedded to our sense of being and sense of value and sense of worth. And you will see later on, as a result of the hierarchical differences between these gender norms and expectations, it can take a very, very dark turn. And not just for women, okay? However, it is very important to acknowledge that it is destructive on feminine bodies, but it is also destructive on masculine bodies, right? Here we go in this little meme that I have. I am the thing that she imagines she lacks. And it's this kind of male persona that I think a lot of Freudian thought comes from, of, this phallocentrism, that the woman is lacking because she isn't a man. And that is what she's been cultivated to think. Actually, a lot of the time, there is this feeling, loss of power, loss of autonomy that a woman will come to know over time. And sometimes it can be mistaken for this feeling of, well, maybe it's just because I'm not a man that is the issue here. And it really isn't that. It's the structure, right? The structure that makes female bodies feel so disempowered. And so there's this illusion through this meme. And then, of course, the woman's shirt says, I am the projection of his desire to feel whole. And that is the voyeuristic, the fetishistic, feminine body that she is supposed to take on and subsume all throughout her life. So, as conceptualized by Megan Burke, there is a distinguishable feminine existence separate from the bodied existence from that of a masculine one. There are socialized divisions. Now, these divisions are really dependent on a male, patriarchal, cis white heteronormative standard, okay? This isn't something that we ourselves just can claim or dictate and parse through, okay? Basically, if you happen to appear feminine according to the male standards that have been decided, you take on, in some shape or form, a feminine existence. So whether you yourself deem yourself a woman, or whether you deem yourself feminine enough to be a woman, or whether you yourself undergo some kind of transformational change where you become something other than woman, it does not matter, because the feminine existence is still put on you, conforming you, straining you, and constricting you. Right? Unfortunately, I am just displaying behaviors and acting in ways. And that's just kind of the general opinion I think that women feel, is sometimes we inadvertently ask ourselves, why exactly am I buying into this cop-out? Right? Why am I subconsciously or consciously giving in to this idea that I must express myself in this feminine existence in order to be finally perceived or genuinely just respected and deemed of value, right? And it's this constant push and pull of giving in to the feminine existence that is put onto us, and also, of course, denying that feminine existence. So, let's see here. I want to read the larger quote here because I feel like it kind of it contextualizes what exactly I said in a more theoretical framework from Megan Burke, and it goes as such: a feminine existence is a gendered existence that lives freedom through men, and thus lives a relative existence. A feminine existence is not necessarily synonymous with woman as a gender identity or subjectivity, but insofar as it is a mode of existence that confers recognition in a heteromasculinist world, many girls and women embark on realizing a feminine existence, even if at some points they rebel and protest. At the same time, even if one does not make oneself a woman in this way, one does not make oneself a woman at all. One can assume a feminine existence by being rendered in this way by others. One can, by instance, be taken as a woman who exists for men and is treated accordingly, even if one does not understand oneself to be a woman. And I kind of discussed this already in relation to non-binary existences and trans existences. But one other thing I really want to touch on that I don't think I drove home is this idea that women can only attain a semblance of control and freedom and Mind you, you can't see my face right now due to this presentation, but I am putting freedom in air quotes here. This is not true freedom. This is freedom within the confines of a white hegemonic ideal. White cis heteronormative ideal, okay? So if your feminine existence is appeasable enough according to the male gaze, that is in which you can achieve some fluidity in your control and autonomy. But really, it is paradoxical. It is minimizing at the same time, right? Because you're sacrificing your own self needs and desires at the expense of attaining some semblance of autonomy. So, why exactly do we have to deal with this feminine existence? Where does this stem from, quite frankly? A lot of us are curious, and I myself am too. And I would like to assert that the reason that this feminine existence has been put on to the feminine body is simply because of fear. Fear from the patriarchy and the fact that women, if granted control, if granted space to freely move as their feminine selves, they would be able to dismantle the patriarchy insofar that it would encourage other bodies, other spaces to also unite and take up space. And that, of course, is anti-patriarchal because the patriarchy itself, the white cis heteronormative world, seeks to maintain a sense of rigidity, a sense of conformity, hierarchy, where the white cis heteronormative man is at the top, and any other body that is not part of that title is deemed valueless. And so hence is the fear of the feminine body, and hence is this violence that is stemming from this fear, that is manifesting from this fear, making the feminine existence a fearful existence, not only just for women, but for also men. It's the simultaneous fear of, well, if I don't conform, I will be objectified, I will be minimized, I will be disrespected, there's always the possibility of sexual assault. The list goes on. And then for men, of course, if a woman steps out of line, well, fear of their control and false sense of power eradicated. Which I think, these fears are not equivalences in any regard. Hence this just little nod, this joke here of the feminine body as a demon, right? Which has been referenced over time in so many different forms of myth and religious scripture, right? It's a common theme, and it's deeply entrenched in the patriarchy. However, I just want to add that when we're talking about feminine existences, it's not simply the feminine existence that is a threat to the patriarchy, right? It's any other body that does not fit into the hegemonic normality of this standard. So this would include the queer existence, this would include the Black existence, the Latino existence, the East Asian, Indian, Native American, African existence. It's any existence that pushes back against the Eurocentric worldview, okay? That's what we're acknowledging here. So when I'm talking about the feminine existence, I really want you to conceptualize that the feminine existence is deeply entrenched and tied into all these other existences, because inadvertently, the feminine existence, no, not inadvertently, advertently, the feminine existence seeks to dismantle the patriarchy. And by dissolving the patriarchy, you are giving room for other existences. Okay. So, this will go a little bit differently as due to the fact that I do not have a class present. This is a recording, and I am just, trying to go over the time and how this will go. So this will be quicker than what will actually happen in real time. So I would like to cite a quote from Kissy Lemon's Heavy, discussing bodied experience, but more so the experience of finally realizing what it means to have a bodied experience as opposed to the free, liberatory feeling of not having to consciously think of your body as a perceived thing, right? As a separate object worthy of scrutiny. So here we go. That's what Doogie, Layla, and me loved about the deep end. For however long you were in it, for a few minutes of your life, no matter how the big boys laughed at us, our bodies forgot how much they weighed. Then they remembered. So, this, to me, is the dissociative factor that as adults we try to go back to, right? This dissociative feeling of not having to feel our bodies presently. But the euphoria and the nostalgia, I would say, that comes from childhood and not having to feel our bodies is very different from the dissociative feeling you might get currently as an adult, right? It's this absence of having to care. It is, to the utmost point, just, it's freedom. It's autonomy. And it's self-love. It's comfort. And it's safety. So, this is something I will read out to the class when it happens. But Layman plays with temporality and how we go on to conceptualize our bodies and the significance of them throughout our time growing up. Some of us felt our bodies earlier, whereas some of us felt them way later on in life or in random instances. Thus, I would like to lead a group discussion on this topic of forgetting how much we weigh, what we look like, and how we are perceived by the world around us. Can you recall some of the instances in which you were unaware of your body, just freely existing in it? Furthermore, can you compare those instances to the times in which you were reminded of your body, presence, and physical differences? How did those differences shape your sense of self, value, and worth? Do they impact you today? And if so, how do you currently navigate them? So I just want to say I really wish I had given a trigger warning at the start of this presentation. Just want to, before this, this faux discussion happens in this fake presentation that's occurring right now. Well, it's not fake, but imagined presentation. Hopefully, when I actually present this to the class, in an actual class, I will present a trigger warning in advance, because I am aware that the content here is very, very heavy. It's very, it takes a lot of emotional energy to invest yourself in, especially when thinking about our bodies, but also because I'm talking about the trespass of bodies as well, and that can be very triggering. So feel free, whoever's watching this right now, to take the time to answer this on your own time if you feel so inclined. It might be very liberating. I wrote a poem talking about my own experience with my body, and comfort with it, and just identification and what it means to be present in my body and all that. So it was very helpful. But moving on, I'm assuming that people will be talking about the times in which they first felt what it meant to be scrutinized in their body. Probably in the moment as a child for seemingly nothing, right? It makes no sense as to why, for instance, I'll draw upon my own anecdote. It makes no sense that, a young 7-year-old girl would be told that she needs to close her legs because it's inappropriate while sitting, right? That is not something that a young girl should be introduced to, and yet that manifests as a temporal pause. Now, what is a temporal pause? Because I referred to it at the beginning, but I want to really delve deep into what this means. A temporal pause, to me, as I identify it, and as I've kind of gathered reading Megan Burke's work in When Time Warps, is that there is a past and future-focused thinking that makes us, as bodies, revisit places in our bodies that may have been triggering, traumatizing, or euphoric, but a lot of the time it tends to be of the negative negative quality, and that is a temporal pause, right? It takes us away out of the present out of the present space that we take, and our feeling, and we revisit either the past, or we are future-based thinking, avoiding the current body or situation that we're in currently and taking space up in the future, which can be healthy to a certain degree, right? If you are trying to situate yourself in relation to the present, but if it takes a dissociative quality, then it is a temporal pause, and it is most likely not beneficial in the long run. So this quote kind of sums it up, by Megan Burke. Temporality, the lived experience of time, not only reveals the centrality of sexual domination in women's lives, but also discloses a tacit embodied operation of normative gender, white, cis, hetero, and subjective life, which in turn reifies violence, physical, sexual, social, and ontological, against other marginalized populations. And so what this temporality is when we have these temporal pauses, it is violent inherently because it is taking us away from the space and comfort and safety that we could be having in our current present bodies, right? It is an entrapment of sorts where we are frozen in time, either in the past, or we are idolizing a body which has not been formed yet. And so, hence is the problem of temporal pauses, right? There are a few instances, and Kesey Lemon's heavy, a lot of them involving sexual assault, right? The sexual assault of Layla, who describes wanting to float in the deep end, right? But it's an accessible place. And so in order to attain that accessibility, she is required to sleep with all of these older boys who I would say, because it's an issue of consent and it's obviously put onto her, I consider it a form of rape. And in example 2, Kesey is sexually assaulted by his babysitter. Of course, Kesey is also verbally and physically abused by his mother, and there are also racist encounters that Kesey faces both as a young boy in school, high schooler, and then also up to the point where he becomes a professor. And in all these instances, there are temporal pauses of this feeling that resides in the body that is taking shape and holding us in place, rigidifying us, so that we are no longer able to move, no longer able to act and consciously slip out into a temporal state of freedom, right? So this is quite blatantly shown in the instance, my body knew things that my mouth and mind couldn't, or maybe wouldn't express. It knew that all over my neighborhood, boys were trained to harm girls in ways girls could never harm boys. Straight kids were trained to harm queer kids in ways queer kids could never harm straight kids. Men were trained to harm women in ways women could never harm men. Parents were trained to harm children in ways children would never harm parents. Babysitters were trained to harm kids in ways kids could never harm babysitters. My body knew white folk were trained to harm us in ways we could never harm them. And so, the body knowing that there is this directed harm, knowing that your body is not off limits, it's a target, right? It's a subject of objectification, of violence. And then, comparatively knowing that your body is always in this situational pain, but then realizing that the other body, in this case the white folk, right? The white body, the straight heterosexual body, the adult body, those bodies have power. They have safety. Unlike the accessible body that Kesey and others experience in their lifetime, right? And so what happens as a result of these temporal pauses that occur both in the past and in the future is, as I've mentioned already, the siphoning off of the present body, of what it means to be in the current space that you are in, and which is a healing and liberatory space. So here are just a few other quotes from Heavy and the short story Goblin with Rachel Harrison. Wait, yeah, this one. So let's get into body dysmorphia, shall we? Because I believe that there is a strong correlation to body dysmorphia and this idea of a temporal pause, and the temporal pause stemming from gender norms and body standards, right? Also, just peep this fucking awesome painting that correlates so perfectly to this subject. And not only is the goblin depicted as like a mask, right? And mind you, this was made way before I read Goblin or anything, and my friend Dawson had no recollection of, as far as I know, of this short story. And so this is just, this is like a symbolic truth that I believe is just so present in this idea of the goblin, of this body dysmorphia, of the masks we have to wear. Excuse me, sorry. Fighting off a cold. So I just kind of want to give like a really quick rundown of eating disorders, mainly anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder. So within the 1930s and 1940s, finally eating disorders were understood as psychological issues that, I don't want to say issues, but serious psychological problems that manifested beyond just the mental. It is like I said, a bodily experience, right? This is something that is fully, I don't know how else to say it. It's a full-bodied experience, fully destructive, right? In every mode and every capacity of its reach. So finally, in the 1930s and 1940s, that's been established. Okay, come the 1959-60 mark, okay, binge eating disorder is acknowledged. And this is very important because prior to 1959, only anorexia and bulimia were being closely watched, mainly due to the fact that eating disorders were only associated with losing dramatic amounts of weight, and rather than the idea of eating too much, of gaining too much weight, that was never considered a source of issue. So finally, they're on the same wavelength. We finally recognize that both of those qualities of eating disorders function very destructively on the self. So, come the 1980s, eating disorders are finally added to the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, just further acknowledging that this is, this takes a toll on the self, and it results in death. Like, many people die from this. This is not something that should be taken lightly. And then lastly, in 2013, binge eating disorder is added to the DSM-5, being the most prevalent eating disorder, as opposed to anorexia and bulimia, which are still quite common. And, I didn't mention this on the timeline, but anorexia was also added to the DSM-5, I believe. Okay. So, just to kind of put it into full gear here, if we're going to get statistical, oh God, sorry, over 30 million people in the United States are plagued by eating disorders, with at least one death relating to eating disorders occurring every 62 minutes. That's how involved these eating disorders are. That's how grand scale it is. So this really puts into perspective how many bodies are dealing with body dysmorphia to some degree, right? Because I believe that often plays a huge role in eating disorders. And also are plagued by these gender norms, right? Because body disorders, at least starting from debatedly, according to the article that I was reading by Strum, and many people can disagree. I mean, body standards have existed all throughout time, but the dramatic upsurging of eating disorders at a detrimental cost to lose weight, to fit those beauty standards, never existed to the point that they have until at least the 70s, the 1970s. That's when it really started to take off, and it's only gotten worse. So let's dive into feminine body standards, which are very different from masculine body standards, and it's very important to acknowledge those differences. A lot of the feminine body standards are central to hiding. And this connects back to the feminine existence as taking up space, of being a passive body, freely to be observed, and gaining value from being objectified and deemed pretty, right? And so a lot of it involves hiding our curves, hiding our realness, so as not to be seen as just our bodies, right? But then at the same time, we end up paradoxically internalizing ourselves as objects, right? Treating our body as an object, so as to be perceived well. So it's a cyclic issue, right? And of course, a lot of these expectations are very, very unrealistic. A lot of the bodily features that are put on to women tend to be idyllic, and very fetishistic. And so the body standards that are put onto women tend to be not achievable. Like the hourglass figure, unless you are innately born with that body structure, which women can be, you know, if you are not born with that body figure, it's very, very hard. And it feels like a punishing of self to hate the body that you were provided, right? The body structure that you innately were born with, and to force yourself into this standard, in this case, the hourglass. And of course, as a result of this, this understanding of the feminine body, a fat phobia, I believe, is like the equivalent of minimizing your body. It is the idea that if you were to take up space and enjoy the body that you truly were born in, the body that you have and have toiled and survived in, that you're currently being seen and smiling, enjoying yourself in, that is taking up too much space in the eyes of the patriarchy. And therefore, I believe that is the origin of fat phobia. Because it is this idea that somehow a woman can be comfortable in her skin, despite not being desirable to the white-coated male gaze. And of course, I draw a parallel to this idea of thin pity, right? That people can have, oh my gosh, they're so fat. You're still beautiful even though you're fat, right? Which is like comparative to this idea of white guilt that we see in white saviordom. And I just wanted to draw that parallel because it really does feel the same. And I think that that definitely manifests doubly so in women who happen to be of color and also fat. And you get that from these white women who project these feelings onto them, even though they don't understand that those feelings are the product of a patriarchal standard. So, looking at the time, making good time, I wanted to show this YouTube video called it's a pro-Anna poem, and it's by this young woman who, by the way, just for reference, she is no longer anorexic. I mean, no longer currently battling anorexia, I might say, because everyone has cyclic resurgences every now and then when it comes to body disorders. That's just a thing. But she is actually a therapist, I believe, and she made an update video about 3 years ago about saying how she was in so much of a better place in her life, and she is so thankful to have gotten there. So, please don't worry about her mental state. She's more than okay. Here you go. Hopefully this will load. Okay.
I wrote this poem about a year ago, so it's not one of my best, but I want to share it anyway because a very strong way that I used to feel, which is pro anorexia. And it's very sad that I used to feel that way. And I am no longer pro anorexia, and I don't believe in pro anorexia. But I want to share this poem to show, I want to show where believing in pro anorexia can lead you and how it can hurt you in so many ways, and how it can truly be damaging and make you hate yourself. And that's really sad. That's a really sad thing to see. So, this is a pro and a poem, and I hope you can enjoy and maybe learn something from it. Anna Girl, a prayer. Anorexia synthetic. I saw it. I wanted it. I got it for myself. Gluttony aesthetic. I am her, the Anna Girl. I've given her my health. When I run, she's only paces ahead of me. Anna Girl, I'm not lonely. Your image is the key. You smile in your bikini, your shining hair and catwalk stroll. Your glassy eyes see through me, rotten skin and filthy soul. Anna Girl, you laugh with me and bat your lashes at the stars. Your midnight dress, your skinny legs, you tell me that you've seen my scars, and that you love me just the same, although you'll never tell your name. You'll teach me to be just like you and stay by my side through and through. This thirst is so pathetic. I have to be her. My trust, it cannot falter. No glamour nor poetic. She calls me, she'll help me, I whisper to her altar. Send me strength, Anna Girl, this prayer is just for you. I do crunches, squats, and curls, your promises are true, 'cause I see my bones protruding, and I see my soul shine gaunt. Mild spirit, your hope is filling all those girls whose minds you haunt. There's a catch to this disease, I'll never be like you. But I'll try as hard, and please, just let me be like you. If I could live one moment in your pristine skin, your spotless mind, I'd be long and I'd be thin. Let me leave myself behind. Anna Girl, be my only self. I can't be this empty girl, you're so much more than me. Whimsy girl, you tease me. Soon I will be you, and then you'll be jealous of me. Anna Girl, so happy, my best friend and my master. Tripping through my consciousness, you revealed your flawlessness. Deathly damsel delicate, so lovely losing faster. That weight you lost, now free and found, your path in life to free girls bound. Feminine immaculate in my eyes, your image is my poor disguise. Your slender waist, your see-through skin, watching you makes me begin to starve my body and feed my soul. Just let me be like you. Blushing soul, ever shrinking goal, just let me be like you. Friends and lovers come and go. Anna stays forever, she's the ever after kind. But one day if you tell her no, she won't leave, she's got you, she's burrowed in your mind.
Okay. So, as you can tell, there's quite a few references to, I believe, idolatry, this false standard, and then this feeling of not having anything within yourself, and so you gain some kind of euphoric feeling of being a projection. Right? Anna Girl, your master. Kind of this colonialistic parallel too, which I will draw to further later on. But okay, just to continue on with the body standards that feminine bodies have, because there are tons, I just kind of wanted to break further into the idea that this is like an external value. Okay, the feminine body, as I mentioned, is like a projection. It's not real, it's not tangible, it's not authentic, and it's not free. And so because of that, it's not freely given. It's something that you have to work for, right? This idea to work out, to constantly perfect your body, rather than just simply being in it for fear of being judged or being deemed valueless. And so I personally believe that this whole feminine existence and the way feminine bodies are treated in social media, especially, but just socially in societal structure, patriarchal structure, is that it is a submissive body. And so losing weight, this idea of constantly losing weight or never being fully content with your body is this idea of subordination and sexual objectification that you are heeding to, chasing after, right? Just as Megan Burke says, the social and embodied destiny of womanhood entails learning to experience one's body as a passive thing, to perceive and feel oneself as a doll, and to experience the world as a closure. And I draw connections to this in the sense that Goblin, the short story by Rachel Harrison, makes references to this idea of pro-ana and pro-mia, which stands for pro-anorexia and pro-bulimia. Right? The male, not male, the main character is said to struggle with both bulimia and anorexia in moments in her timeline. And, you know, her using this app called Goblin, right? The Goblin app, and listening to this creature telling her to control her body, to do anything to get to the state of skinniness, is, I believe, a direct correlation to the pro-ana and pro movements that have surfaced as a result of this, probably stemming mainly from the 90s movements, then onward through the internet, like these web pages entirely dedicated to getting smaller. And a lot of them have anorexic imagery, either stuff that will shame you, make you feel like you're never good enough, or kind of pictures like this. I didn't really want to post too much as it can be very triggering, but nothing tastes as good as skinny feels. And it's like that, you know, the Goblin app really functions just like that. This idea of reaffirming these eating disordered problematics. But let's explore the concept of Goblin good, because there is a message that the narrator receives that goes as such: "Hi, gorgeous, your goblin is visiting, doing some goblin good." And I just feel that it's a highly paradoxical statement, right? Because if the goblin within oneself functions as an extension of your eating disorder, or the internalized ideas that you have of feminine body standards, right? Part of it is an extension of you, right? The feminine existence is a part of you. And I believe that the Goblin and the short story Goblin is an extension of both the feminine existence that we take on as women. If you happen to identify as a woman, I'm speaking to you, or anybody who identifies with the feminine existence, and this other patriarchal structure embedded in the feminine existence that is not us, that we cater to and yet adopt as us. And so I believe that this is brilliantly executed by the imagery of this scene right here. I'd begun to undress when I saw the goblin out of the corner of my eyes, a smear of green disappearing. I turned to see where it went, but instead saw myself. So this is the goblin, right? We are the goblin. Is the goblin good? Not necessarily. The goblin is paradoxical. The goblin is as a byproduct, right? It's an extension of something that is not good inherently, that inherently is destructive and evil, right? So the goblin is this patriarchal structure that we've internalized that is evil and destructive. But also, the goblin is also telling us, right? The goblin tells the narrator that her body is not good enough. Her body is inherently unattractive, wild, and unrestrained. So it's this paradoxical nature of fearing the goblin that is ourselves, but the goblin also within ourselves telling us to fear our own bodies. Okay? That, to me, is how I read Goblin, and I believe that this connects deeply into the way eating disorders manifest, in the sense that we are first start out differentiating the eating disordered thoughts until we become those eating disordered thoughts, until we become the body dysmorphia, until we are unable to discern what exactly are the good thoughts, right? What are the destructive thoughts? Which thoughts are the ones that are actually helping you feel safe and comfortable in your body, right? It becomes so ambiguous because we grow comfortable with the idea of treating ourselves as unattractive, as worth being treated destructively, right? So I wanted to connect this to the idea of goblin mode, which is this. I'm sure a lot of you know what goblin mode is. It's a pop culture reference. It's a slang term, right, for the way of behaving intentionally and shamelessly, giving into and indulging in base habits and activities without regard for adhering to social norms or expectations. And so a lot of people say, I'm going into goblin mode, like when you like hit your last straw. But I kind of wanted to play with this idea of the goblin mode because the goblin, inherently, the patriarchal goblin of beauty standards that we've taken on as ourselves, constantly tells us that we are shamelessly living and indulging in things that are habits because they don't fit into the social normality or expectation that we are supposed to be fitting into. And so there's this, like I said, this cyclic defeatist feeling of never being good enough, of never being beautiful enough, right? Of never getting that restraint, of never being in total control because our bodies are not meant to be controlled. But hold your horses. Whoa. Obviously, this whole goblin thing, this whole eating disordered thinking, is not simply just applicable to women in the feminine existence. Obviously, this affects other people, such as the masculine body existence and the standards that are put on to the masculine body. And this is just as destructive, in the sense that it produces a thought work of not minimizing the body, of restricting the body from a specific form, right? Conforming to the masculine ideal of a gym bro mentality, appraising physical strength and equating that to self-value insofar that it basically externalizes the idea of being a dominant figure. And so it is inadvertently shaping this idea, right? If a man needs to be muscular in order to be sexy, which I do not believe so, a man needs to be strong in order to be of value. Stating that is inherently buying into this projection that men need to take care of women, that men's bodies are more powerful than women, that men's bodies can exert their control over women, right? It's all interconnected. So, of course, as I state below here, it is this eroticization of male dominance that, of course, gives leverage to rape culture, that it encourages rape culture. And it's disgusting, but that's how it functions, is this minimization of the feminine body and the expansion, but weaponized expansion of the male body. But of course, this expansion cannot be anything more than muscular, because muscular is strong. And according to the words of Andrew Tate, I'm not going to play it because, you know what, I figured it's just too toxic to really revisit, and I don't want to give him a platform. I debated whether to show it, but I'm not going to. And that fatness is a weakness. And so hence there's the fat phobia again. Nobody can be fat. Fat for men is not taking up space, which women can easily take up space when they appreciate their fatness. Fatness for men is weakness because it is saying that you refuse to buy into the idea of controlling your body, specifically for the strengthening of domination. It is anti-domination, in my opinion. And I believe that the same thing applies to being a thin man, right? A thin man who does not work out is the same sense of weak. Of course, being fat is worse than being thin in the eyes of men, of course. That is made quite apparent by Andrew Tate and other gym bro guys. So, here are just some other instances of body dysmorphia within Heavy that depict the masculine existence, and how, there's an equal sense of suffering here that occurs within body dysmorphia. It is not gendered. It's gendered in the sense that they're different experiences, but it is not simply reductive to just women. It affects everybody in some shape or form. So, to encapsulate this really is like nearly everyone else at the gym, I wasn't in the gym to be healthy. I was in the gym to feel in control of how fat I looked and felt. My body knew that my weight, the exact number, became an emotional, psychological, and spiritual destination a long time ago. And again, it's this valuation of the body, of the external, that has been socialized onto not just women but also men, and it's specifically Kisi Lemon and Heavy, not Heaven, and Heavy describes one of his first experiences being sexually assaulted, and it wasn't because he was sexually assaulted at such a young age. He equivocated his value through the body that he took on. And so when he was no longer being sexually assaulted, he assumed it was because of his body, that he was no longer attractive enough to be with his babysitter. Disgusting, right? But this is the mentality that is being shaped into gender and body norms, right? So let's get into it. This would normally be a class discussion, but since this is a recording, this won't be a serious class discussion. This will just be, a small clip and then moving on. But I wanted to lead a class discussion on this small clip because I feel like it's really important to acknowledge these points that are being made. Oops. Can I ignore the ad? Okay.
You brought up a good point. Like, I think it's all just centered around shame, honestly. And I think, I didn't go to school for psychology or anything, but I think it has to do with some sort of like PTSD after that shame. Because, like, honestly, I don't have many people shame my body, like, anymore. Like, it doesn't really happen to me anymore. People don't come up to me touching my belly. People don't comment on my pictures like, oh, you fat. Like, but I was so much growing up. I think the little boy in me is scared, like it's going to happen again. And I think when we get older, it's some sort of, or some, whatever the mind does, but some sort of like PTSD of like just trying to avoid shame and just all the things that can come with whatever you attach it to. So for me, it was my body. It was my skin color as well, and it was my queerness. But when it comes to my queerness and my blackness, I'm very unapologetic and I love it. But with my body, that's why I'm like, does this ever go away? Because how was I able to accept my blackness in such a racist environment and my queerness, but my body is like, it's never ending.
Can I challenge that? I wonder that last piece. You're making me think about the difference. I wonder, like, our bodies feel like something we can control. Right? I think that sometimes we think that if I work out, I know that my body can look a different way. If I eat a certain food, like when Lean was talking about eating more and, to try to gain weight, that might be something I can control. But like race, queerness, that is something that we can choose, right? So I wonder if that's a part of it, because and society also tells you that you need to do XYZ to adjust, right? So new mom, I'm looking, I got to look at people getting the snapback and that whole, kind of expectation that people are supposed to bounce back and have this, body that doesn't exist after you've had a child. So that's what I'm thinking when you said that.
Yeah, because that was a word. Because when you think about it, that was a word. Because when you think about it, all of the homo.
Okay. So then this brings us back to these ideas of shame, right? PTSD that can occur as a result of comments that have been made on your body. that you hold with you for life, really, that you repeat inadvertently, that take these temporal pauses and hit you over and over again. Um, and so these comments, they dig into your sense of worth and then make you question whether you are capable of controlling the amount of violation that can be enacted on your body, right? The comments that are directed towards your body, not even just, physical violation, but comments like that could shame you. Those are those are what most people are trying to avoid when they adjust their body, right? When they try to control their body. And so I I would normally lead a class discussion on this, ask people about their own opinions on what these people mentioned. One of them being a therapist, and the other just I think is a really cool YouTuber that I stumbled upon. So let me move on from there. So, as we know, there are negative implications as a result of these internalizing as a result of internalizing these gender norms and these temporal pauses and these the voices in our head that remind us to lose weight, that beg of us, that make fun of us, that destroy our sense of worth. And I would say that according to Helene Cixous, in The Laugh of the Medusa, which is a work that I really wanted to give to heed to in this presentation, is that as a result of these gendered expectations, this divisioning and the way it's all structured on masculine and feminine bodies is to promote what Helene Cixous calls anti-love. And I'll just read this quote here because I believe she says it more concisely than I ever could. Men have committed the greatest crime against women. Insidiously, violently, they have led them to hate women, to be their own enemies, to mobilize their immense strength against themselves, to be the executants of their virile needs. They have made for women an anti-narcissism. A narcissism which loves itself only to be loved for what women haven't got. They have constructed the infamous logic of anti-love. And of course, this anti-love manifests currently into, inceldom. I mean, this is a current problem that we're seeing of all these men who blame women for the expectations that have not only been put on them, but the expectations that have been put onto masculine bodies, right? This idea that men need to be dominant, that men need to be sexually promiscuous, and that women should just be submissive and bend over. They direct their hatred at not being able to achieve those false I don't know how else to, false agendas, false expectations, right? They're highly problematic expectations, but because they're inachievable inherently, the structure is not able to be maintained. Because there's pushback, right? Women don't want to be submissive. Women don't want to simply be treated as bodies. It's disgusting. It's this endless cycle of masculine and male passing individuals directing their anger at women rather than looking inward, rather than directing their confusion towards the hierarchy of the patriarchy that has assembled these narratives for them. And of course, anti-love is at the core of rape culture, right? It is this idea that instead of loving the feminine existence, the feminine body as it is, as it freely exists, fluidly, it is no longer possible to love the feminine body, right? If you can't love the feminine body for what it is, if you can only love it as an object, it's null at that point. The body is hated. It must be hated if it wants to be treated, if if it's projected as an object instead of its truth, right? And so, of course, as a result of this anti-love, it encourages hate, violence, and injury on the feminine existence and on the feminine body, right? So, heteromasculinist economies of desire, heterosexist sexual objectification, and the threat of rape are pervasive denials of agency and subjectivity, making a woman, as Cahill claims, a pre-victim. These expressions of sexual domination are taken to be produced by and support a rape culture that is a historical and social environment in which rape is normalized. So it's the normalization of objectification, of she deserved it because she didn't, because she stepped out of line, right? She took too much space, therefore, crossing those boundaries, violence is well deserved. And it's just this indifference, right? This apathy that Kissy Leymon refers to in this quote. I'm not going to go into it because I don't have much time and I really don't want to draw into too much of your time here. But also, let's touch on these implications, okay? Recognizing that a bodied experience, as I mentioned previously, is these bodied existences are not limited to the feminine existence. And so it's important to recognize the, how do I describe it? The specificity to these existences that could possibly be compounded intersectionally as a result of the patriarchy and its heterosexual, heteronormative, right, white cisgendered norms. So, for example, you know, the black feminine existence will be very, very different from the white feminine existence, and that's by no means due to the fact that the white feminine existence exists. It's simply because of the patriarchy and the hierarchical structure of its treatment towards specific existences, right? You know, the gay, lesbian, or bi feminine existence, or masculine existence in this case, will differ very differently from the heteronormative feminine or masculine existence. This is just, you know, this is the structure. This is the violent nature of the structuring. So, touching on that, it's important to acknowledge the coloniality. Okay, oops. The coloniality of gender that occurs as a result of temporality. And this is very important because it kind of discusses this intersectionality that I just referenced previously. Because Maria Lugones, which is she is a Latina decolonial philosopher, she discusses how there is a central structure of colonial power that is a racialized sex and gender distinction, which reserves and confers gender onto white bodies and sex onto black bodies, therefore creating and reinforcing colonial racial difference. As forms of social classification, Lugones claims gender humanizes the colonizers, while sex dehumanizes the colonized. This racialized and hierarchical distinction between gender and sex is the base structure of what Lugones calls the colonial modern gender system of the coloniality of gender. And I mean, this is deeply ingrained in U.S. history, right? We've discussed this in class. If I were to mention this to the class that I'm going to present this to, I mean, we've discussed this in class of how black women, if we're going to go historically, black women taken as slaves may have been divided on the grounds of sex, right? Of specific jobs that maybe would be sexed, or specific treatment that would only be dedicated to the differentials of sex, right? Raping black women as opposed to raping black men. Raping black women and not calling their children, and calling their mixed colored children white because the mother happened to be black, right? They systematically structured, you know, slave trade off of that, off of children of black women, because black women did not count as women. They were sexed, but they were not women. They did not count as women. However, and of course, The implication here is that white women who happen to have relations with black men could call their children white. And hence, there's this trespass, this rape myth that white women would inadvertently be raped by black men because just on the basis that black men also did not count fully as men. Okay? So there are two instances that go back to slave trade and slave times that connect to this and have deep roots in the way that gender and sex are conceptualized for other feminine existences. And I just really wanted to capture this essence by showing this beautiful picture, a painting by my friend. And I think it clears up this idea of colonizing the feminine existence, the black feminine existence, as if she is simply land. And if to uncolonize, to decolonize this feminine existence would be to let her freely exist as her true, authentic form, her true, beautiful, extensive body. Anyway, so the coloniality of gender here. Let's break it down even more to the idea of a Eurocentric civilized or uncivilized past. So, although the colonial view makes a clear distinction between the uncivilized past and the civilized present, there is a constitutive relationship between them. The civilized past is the necessary antecedent to civilized time. The coloniality of time is thus a temporal ordering that relies on hierarchical inseparability between the uncivilized past and the civilized present and future. So here we go. The civilized present is the Eurocentric present, right? Which has all these dominant white-centric patriarchal worldviews on gender expectation, and on bodily standards and expectations. And it has never been inclusive to any other body besides the white body. Hierarchically for the feminine existence, that would mean the white feminine existence, and anything beyond that would be deemed uncivilized. And unless, the black feminine body, the Latina feminine body, the East Asian feminine body, the list goes on, indigenous feminine body, had made the decision to civilize itself to the standards and gender norms of a white feminine body, they are perpetually repeating this coloniality of time, this ordering of being an object, not fully woman, not fully realized or understood to be of worth. And an example of this, I think it's in this one. I think so. Wrong one. That one's next though. Is this real? Which comments on the white feminine existence and how the coloniality of gender makes it impossible for any other feminine existence to fit into these reductive standards for women and in all feminine existences, really. Let me see here. We go. Oops.
More feminine if I didn't grow my beard, if I removed my body hair, if I waxed, if I had electrolysis. And obviously people can do what they want to do, but I grew up with hairy brown women who were feminine. And I grew up with models of brown women who were beautiful, even if they were hairy. And I think that oftentimes whenever we say, look more feminine, what we actually are saying is look more like a white woman. It's like whiteness dominates our imagination of what it means to be a man or a woman, and I think that's troublesome. I was constantly told that I was...
Okay. So, as you can tell, this is still a very present issue, and it's this idea that the white feminine existence has been so normalized. These standards have been so inconveniencing to other feminine existences that we reduce other feminine existences to be unattractive, unworthy, unbeautiful. But of course, another problematic of this consistent of this civilization, well, not civilization, of civilizing the uncivilized, really is inherent in this reel that I have, which demonstrates a white man having created an AI generated model, which he presents, makes money from, profits off of, and she's black. And so I would like you guys to watch this as well. It's crazy. Oop.
Yeah. She presents as a black woman. She was created by an Englishman, a white Englishman, fashion photographer turned graphic designer. And she's been working with many luxury brands since she debuted about like 4-ish years ago.
Right, yeah.
And I previously spoke about her when I was on Al Jazeera.
I remember.
Talking about virtual blackface, basically, because I think it's super messed up that there are actual black women models who would be happy to star in these campaigns, but instead brands are picking virtual black models where none of that money goes to black people. Like, the fact that we exist in a world where it's okay for a man who is white to make a virtual black woman and then profit off that virtual black woman, to me, is the story.
Yeah.
That says it all.
Yeah.
And it makes me angry and uncomfortable that that is still the case, and that people are like, yeah, this is a really good choice. Let's work with Shudu.
Okay.
Shudu is a...
So, you know, the coloniality of gender is still very alive and well. And will have to be rethought and reconsidered as we go and think of AI and who's allowed to use black bodies and showcase black bodies, black feminine existences as well, because there's an inherent power dynamic here, obviously. So let's move on to, of course, well, not really, it's a not entirely a different shift, but I really want to revisit temporal pauses, right? And this connects on multi-level instances of feminine existence, okay? All feminine existences, I believe, experience severe temporal pauses constantly. So I wanted to revisit temporal pauses from Megan Burke's theorizations of temporality and femininity, and then also discuss the Medusa myth as it relates to Helene Cixous's The Laugh of the Medusa, and connect it all together. So just revisiting temporality. The temporal cage of the passive present preempts a woman from experiencing herself as a sexual object. Instead, she is petrified into a sexualized idol. When a woman is abandoned in and takes up the present, she lives a temporal paralysis that turns her into sexualized prey. So hence is this caging of the feminine body, right? Being petrified, turned to stone, is this feeling of the temporal pause that may take up maybe the majority of her life, depending on what she has gone through, right? And depending on what feminine existence she maintains. Because the male gaze is everywhere. It is not unavoidable. We cannot just get rid of the male gaze, right? It is with us. So just a quick synopsis to connect the Medusa myth to this idea of being paralyzed in the past, as well as the future, depending on the circumstances. Medusa was a mortal woman who happened to be sleeping on Athena's temple, and then she was raped by Poseidon. And of course, Athena ends up turning Medusa into a gorgon, which is a monstrous creature who can turn anybody who gazes at them into stone. And, you know, gorgons have snake hair, which is very, very, very symbolic. Just to, like, give a quick preface, snakes tend to be related to Mycenaean culture, pre-Greek, referring to life, death, and rebirth, okay? So Depending on the interpretation of the myth, some people believe that Athena punished Medusa and therefore turned her into a gorgon, but other feminist theorists believe that perhaps Medusa was turned into a gorgon so that she could be protected from the possibility of being raped again and defend herself with this mirror-like image of like turning men into the way in which she felt when she was raped. Because it's important to acknowledge that Medusa was a mortal woman, and despite there being a few other Gorgons mentioned in Greek myth, none of them were mortal. They had already been immortal beings. Okay, so like I said, Medusa epitomizes the male gaze, returning it, and so basically showing this objectification of being raped, of being reduced to an object, and spinning it around back onto those who view and gaze onto her as an idol, as a creature too, to be feared, right? We've discussed this idea of the patriarchal need for a feminine existence simply due to a fear of a woman taking up too much space. And I just want to mention, because the Medusa is very, very symbolic in regards to surviving rape, that, trigger warning, essay too, that it is a common tattoo that essay victims get to kind of touch on this idea of regaining one's agency and turning that what could be described as a traumatic event into a life of renewal and newfound power. So I just wanted to give an acknowledgement to that. But why is the Medusa laughing, right? Why would she be laughing about these dark circumstances? I personally believe that the laugh is kind of this acknowledgement that there is that the whole idea of a Medusa, of a monstrous woman, right, who dares looks back at the male gaze and freezes them, is funny in the sense that to them, to the male gaze, to the patriarchy, that heteronormative misogynistic structuring of society, that is scary. That is a woman who refuses to be passive, who refuses to freeze, who refuses to be locked into the objectification of her body. And that is inherently funny, that throughout myth and beyond myth, women have been treated this way. That, I mean, for goodness, I mean, a woman who dresses seductively and owns her power in that, and refuses to back down once a man considers her a whore or depicts her as disgusting or any other descriptor, a bitch, and a woman who doesn't back down in the face of that. And the fact that it perturbs men, it disturbs men, it scares men who have a patriarchal worldview, it's funny. It is inherently funny. And the fact that the patriarchy feels the need to reduce women to such passive beings for fear of the possibility of women not taking it anymore is ridiculous. And so another part of this, another layer of this humor is that, oh, how so funny. We almost bought into the idea that we ourselves were monsters for wanting to take up space, for wanting to dress the way we do, for wanting to love our bodies, right? For authentically being our true most selves. And so this is definitely referenced in these quotes. I'll just read one since I don't have much time, but who, surprised and horrified by the fantastic tumult of her drives, for she was made to believe that a well-adjusted normal woman has a divine composure, hasn't accused herself of being a monster? Who, feeling a funny desire stirring inside her to sing, to write, to dare to speak, in short, to bring out something new, hasn't thought she was sick? Well, her shameful sickness is that she resists death, that she makes trouble. Right? To the male gaze, existing is trouble. Looking back is trouble. Standing in your own power is trouble. And that is super funny. Right? Okay. So, I just kind of want to draw upon my own anecdote here. The reason why I find this really silly, in the midst of the patriarchy, there has to be some kind of humor here. Otherwise, it's almost self-defeating. But sometimes when creepy men will look at me, I will hold their gaze and kind of meet them with the same energy that they're giving me in order to appear just as creepy. And the funny part is they don't realize that they're doing that, and that when I'm doing that, I'm basically showing them how it feels to be seen and objectified like that. And that cracks me up when they look away, they look scared or they're uncomfortable. And I'm like, yeah, see how it feels. And that to me is like the epitome of what Medusa is doing. Like it's funny. Anyway, we're almost at the end, guys. I apologize for taking so much time. Let's revisit Loose Woman. Actually, let's visit Loose Woman. We haven't really touched on Loose Woman that much at all. And I saved her for the last. I saved Sandra Cisneros' poem for the end because it's powerful and it really captures the essence of looking back and laughing in the face of a patriarchal male hegemonic fear, of that fragility, of how scared they really are of us returning and not backing down and taking agency by rewriting our worth. Because I believe that Sandra Cisneros' poem is the epitome of rewriting her worth. Not only as a feminine existence, but as a Latina feminine existence. And I believe that any feminist writer that writes herself into existence is not only writing herself into existence, but writing the existences of other unspoken voices into existence. And that is true power, that is true strength, and that is profound. Since this is not a class discussion, this normally would be, and I don't have anybody really able to do that. I'm just gonna skip this, but this would be really fun to do in class when I do it. These are quotes that I found that I would draw upon if nobody brought up any quotes. Pretty sure my class would, but still. So, breaking past the white male-centric gaze by rewriting our worth. This is the goal here. This is what Helene Sixu, oh my god, Sixu. I was saying it right the entire time until now. Okay. Is this idea of writing. Killing the false woman, breaking down the idolatry that has been put onto us, dissolving the myth, right, of this deity that we were supposed to fit, and this one truth of the male patriarchal hold of a feminine body, dissolving it, breaking it apart, kicking it apart, and violently so disrupting it. And it's directed towards the false woman, right? It's not directed towards any real body, because the false woman was never a real body to begin with. And so, hence is the idea that we are just heavy enough. Once we break open that paralysis, once we break open that body, that false body, that stone idol that has been made over time, shatter it, you see a real, authentic, beautiful body, as depicted by the art here that my friend painted. And it's this rediscovering and reconnecting, right? It's beautiful. And then you get lost in it and you're like, how did I miss it? How did I not know? that I was just heavy enough. And so this, just want to tie this in real quick. This is present-based body love. This, to me, is what I gather from all of my readings, from all my synthesizing with all the texts that I've discussed so far, and from the art that I have cited here in this, in this presentation, is that just like Kisi's grandmother says, 218 pounds is just right, Ki. It's just heavy enough. Heavy enough for what? Heavy enough for everything you need to be heavy enough for. So, in opposition to what Helene Cixous discusses before about anti-love, I suggest present-based body love. Or as Helene Cixous suggests, other love. And other love being the beginning of acknowledging our differences, right? Propping up our differences, celebrating those differences. That's what we need. Reinventing constantly how we define beauty and value and worth, rather than just sectioning and partitioning off like the patriarchal hegemonic structuring that has been repeated over time. It's time to break through and give feminine existence the power to wield value and worth, and to expand and shatter what that means, not just for the feminine existence, mind you, and not just for one feminine existence, but for all existences, the feminine, the masculine, the non-binary, the trans existence, all these existences, all these intersectional existences. This is the goal. And so here's my works cited. And I just want to thank each and every one of you, future watchers who happen to watch this video, and future people who happen to actually see my presentation in person. Thank you for your time. I'm sorry that it took so long. I didn't expect it to, but I am very, very thankful that you took the time to listen and hear what I had to say, and I hope that the message and the information that I provided is helpful. So make sure to love on your bodies, because they're irreplaceable. Thank you!